The 90s were the decade when Japan took over motorcycling. This was the era that gave us absolute legends, that redefined speed, reliability, and engineering. But that greatness did not come easy, because for every icon that shaped the future, Japan also built a few disasters. Bikes so unstable, so downright dangerous, they became death traps on two wheels. We're revealing both sides of that history, 4 of the worst Japanese motorcycles of the 90s and 5 of the very best. The worst, number 4, the Yamaha XJ600 Diversion. We start with a bike that committed the cardinal sin of motorcycling. It was boring. In the early 90s, Yamaha decided they needed a budget middleweight. They looked at their parts bin, found an old air-cooled inline-4 engine that traced its roots back to the early 80s, and slapped it into a tubular steel frame that had the structural rigidity of a wet noodle. They called it the Diversion in Europe and the Seika in America. It featured a 598 cubic centimeter air-cooled inline-4. It made about 61 horsepower on a good day, downhill with a tailwind. It weighed roughly 440 pounds dry. It had a single disc brake up front on the early models that felt like squeezing a block of wood against a cheese grater. The 90s were about excitement. This bike was about apathy. The engine was anemic. It didn't rev with any urgency. It just sort of gathered momentum like a boulder rolling down a gentle hill. But the real problem was the vibration. At highway speeds, this engine buzzed so hard it would put your hands to sleep in 20 minutes. It felt cheap because it was cheap. The suspension was soft and underdamped, meaning if you tried to corner with any enthusiasm, the bike would wallow and protest. It was the beige Camry of the motorcycle world. It did the job, it started every morning, but it inspired absolutely zero passion. In a decade that gave us the Fireblade and the Monster, the Seika 2 was a bike you bought because you couldn't afford anything else. It is a reliable appliance, but as a motorcycle experience, it is a total snooze fest. But if the Seika 2 was boring, the next bike on our list was a bloated betrayal of a legendary name. The worst, number 3, the Suzuki GSXR1100W Water Whale. This hurts to say. The GSXR name is royalty. In the 80s, the GSXR750 and 1100 were race bikes with lights. They were light, air oil cooled, and ferocious. But in 1993, Suzuki decided to add liquid cooling to the big 1100, and in doing so, they lost the plot completely. The engine was a monster. 1,745 cubic centimeters of liquid-cooled power, making 155 horsepower. That sounds great, right? But the problem was the wrapper it came in. The bike ballooned in weight. It tipped the scales at over 500 pounds dry. Once you added gas and oil, you were wrestling a small planet. It betrayed its heritage. The R in GSXR stands for racing, but the 1100W was a sport tourer in denial. It was heavy, long, and cumbersome. While Honda was busy releasing the lightweight Fireblade, Suzuki was building a dinosaur. The handling was the biggest letdown. The frame couldn't quite cope with the massive weight and the brutal power. In fast corners, it would weave and wallow. It felt top-heavy. It was physically exhausting to ride fast. It became known as the Water Whale among enthusiasts who longed for the raw, lightweight feel of the older oil-cooled models. It wasn't a bad bike if you wanted to go very fast in a straight line on the Autobahn. But as a cutting-edge 90s sport bike, it was a dinosaur staring at the meteor. It represented the end of an era where more power was the only answer, right before Honda proved that less weight was the real secret. If you are enjoying this video, please like and subscribe to our channel. You'll be glad you did. But at least the GSXR used conventional technology. Our next failure tried to reinvent the wheel, literally. The worst, number 2, the Yamaha GTS1000. In 1993, Yamaha looked at the telescopic front fork, a piece of technology that had worked perfectly for 50 years, and said, nah, we can do better. They poured millions of yen into developing a revolutionary hub center steering system. The result was the GTS1000, a bike that was so far ahead of its time, it missed the party completely. It used the engine from the FZR1000, detuned to 100 horsepower. It featured a massive Omega frame concept. It had a single-sided front swing arm instead of forks. It had fuel injection and EBS. It cost nearly $13,000 when a flagship sport bike cost $8,000. It was a solution looking for a problem. The hub center steering was supposed to separate braking forces from suspension forces, eliminating brake dive. And it worked, but it completely eliminated feel. Riders complained that the front end felt numb and vague. You couldn't tell what the front tire was doing. It felt like playing a video game with a broken controller. It was also heavy, over 600 pounds, and shockingly expensive. The complex front suspension took up space, limiting the steering lock, so it had the turning radius of a school bus. It chewed through front tires because of the unique suspension geometry. Yamaha took a gamble, and they lost hard. Nobody bought them. They were overly complicated, heavy, and expensive to fix. Today, they are a curiosity, a what-if moment in history, but owning one is a nightmare of proprietary parts and confused mechanics. But if the GTS was just a technological dead end, our #1 worst bike was actively hostile. It earned a nickname that no motorcycle manufacturer ever wants. The worst #1, the Suzuki TL1000S, the Widowmaker. In 1997, Suzuki wanted to beat Ducati at their own game. They built a massive V-twin sport bike to take on the 916. The engine was a masterpiece. The chassis? That was a disaster movie waiting to happen. A 996 cubic centimeter V-twin, making 125 horsepower. It had torque that could rotate the earth. But because V-twin engines are long, Suzuki had to shorten the wheelbase to make it handle. To do this, they couldn't fit a normal rear shock, so they invented a rotary rear damper. This rotary damper is the reason the bike is legendary for all the wrong reasons. It used rotating arms paddling through oil to dampen the bumps, but the unit was mounted right next to the rear exhaust header. It would get hot, boiling hot, and when oil gets hot, it gets thin. You would be riding hard, attacking a canyon road. The damper would overheat and lose all damping ability. Suddenly, your rear suspension was just a bouncy spring with zero control. Combine this with a steep steering angle and a torque monster engine that lifted the front wheel constantly, and you had a recipe for tank slappers. The handlebars would violently slap back and forth, ripping the grips out of your hands. It threw riders into hedges. It threw riders into oncoming traffic. It earned the name the Widowmaker. Suzuki had to issue a global recall to retrofit steering dampers to try and tame the beast. But the reputation was sealed. It is a bike with a flawless engine in a homicidal chassis. Which one of these 4 worst bikes do you think committed the worst sin? The boring XJ600, the bloated GSXR, the complex GTS, or the deadly TL1000S? Let me know your pick in the comments below. But enough negativity. The 90s weren't just about failures. They were about perfection. We are clearing the slate. We are scrubbing the oil off the driveway. We are now entering the Hall of Fame. These are the 5 Japanese machines that defined the decade and still embarrass modern bikes today. The best #5, the Suzuki Bandit 1200. If the TL1000S was the evil twin, the Bandit 1200 was the glorious drunken uncle who was always fun at parties. Introduced in 1996, this bike defined the muscle-naked category. It took the legendary oil-cooled GSXR1100 engine from the 80s, an engine already famous for being indestructible, bored it out to 1,157 cubic centimeters, and tuned it for pure stump-pulling torque. It made about 98 horsepower, which sounds modest on paper, but the way it delivered that power was addictive. It wasn't about peak horsepower. It was about a fat mid-range punch that hit you in the chest at 3,000 RPM. It is the ultimate hooligan bike. It is simple. It is honest. It is a steel tube frame, a massive engine, and 2 wheels. It is famous for being absolutely bulletproof. You can tune these engines to make 150 horsepower with simple mods like a pipe and jet kit, and they won't break. Mechanics love them because they rarely see them for anything other than oil changes. It is the wheelie king. The wheelbase is short enough and the torque is massive enough that the front wheel is purely optional in the first 3 gears. If you open the throttle hard, you are looking at the sky. It is comfortable enough to tour on all day, cheap to insure because it's technically a standard, and parts are available everywhere. You can find used parts on eBay for pennies. It captures the spirit of the 90s perfectly. Big power, simple mechanics, and maximum fun per dollar. It is a cult classic for a reason. But maybe you want something more refined. There is a motorcycle with the sophisticated whine of a V4 engine that was built to last forever. Stay tuned. The best #4, the Honda VFR750F. This is widely considered one of the best motorcycles ever built, period. If you look up reliability and refinement in the dictionary, there is a picture of a 90s VFR a 748 cubic centimeter V4 engine, and not just any engine. This had gear-driven cams. Listen to a VFR running. It has a distinct whine, like a supercharger or a jet turbine. That is the sound of precise gears spinning, meaning you never, ever have to worry about a cam chain tensioner failing. It is the Goldilocks bike. It does everything perfectly. It is sporty enough to drag a knee on the track. It is comfortable enough to put hard luggage on and ride across the country. The build quality in the 90s Honda factories was at its absolute peak. The paint is thick. The fasteners don't rust. The panels fit with microscopic precision. It makes about 100 horsepower, which is the perfect amount for the street. The single-sided swing arm makes it look exotic and makes tire changes a breeze. It is a bike with zero flaws. Some say it's too perfect, bordering on boring, but when you are 500 miles from home in the rain, perfect is exactly what you want. It is the connoisseur's choice. But maybe you don't want perfect. Maybe you want speed, pure, unadulterated, record-breaking speed. The best number 3, the Kawasaki ZX-1100. Before the Hayabusa, there was the King. For 6 years in the 90s, the Kawasaki ZX-11 was the fastest production motorcycle on planet Earth. It was the bike that adorned the bedroom wall of every speed-crazed teenager. 1,052 cubic centimeters of inline-4 Fury. It introduced ram air induction to the masses. That scoop on the nose wasn't just for show. It forced air into the engine at speed, acting like a natural supercharger. It made 145 horsepower. It hits 176 miles per hour. In 1990, that is mind-bending. But the amazing thing about the ZX-11 is that it wasn't a stripped-out race bike. It was a comfortable, heavy, stable sport tourer. You could ride it to the grocery store. It was docile at low speeds, but when you opened the throttle on the highway, it warped space and time. It didn't accelerate, it teleported. It built the reputation of the Ninja as the ultimate speed machine. It is over-engineered, robust, and still commands respect today. If you pull up on a clean ZX-11, people know you appreciate power. It is a velvet-wrapped sledgehammer. But what if you want the bike that won the award for Bike of the Decade? Next on the list is bike that refined the leader-class sport bike before Honda changed the rules. The best number 2, the Yamaha FZR1000 EXUP. This is the bridge between the heavy beasts of the 80s and the featherweights of the modern era. The FZR1000 EXUP was the undisputed king of the street in the early 90s. It was voted Bike of the Decade by Cycle World for a reason. It features a massive 1,002 cubic centimeter engine. But this wasn't just any engine. This was the Genesis engine. It featured a radical 45-degree cylinder bank angle that allowed for straight intake pass. It had 20 valves, that is 5 valves per cylinder, 3 intake, 2 exhaust. This was space-age technology that screamed innovation. The magic ingredient was the EXUP valve. This stands for Exhaust Ultimate Power Valve. It was a servo-controlled butterfly valve located inside the exhaust collector. At low RPM, it stayed closed to increase back pressure and boost torque. As you twisted the throttle, it opened up to let the engine breathe freely. It gave the bike massive low-end grunt that felt like a V-twin. Combined with the screaming top-end power of a Formula One car, it eliminated the flat spots that plagued other engines of the era. It handled. Unlike the wobbly Suzuki GSXR1100, the Yamaha featured a massive aluminum delta box frame. This perimeter frame was incredibly stiff and responsive. It felt planted in corners, giving you confidence to push harder. It delivered 145 horsepower with a silky smoothness that was almost deceptive. You could be doing triple-digit speeds without even realizing it because the chassis was so stable. It is arguably the most beautiful bike of the early 90s, with its iconic dual-round headlights and thick aluminum beam frame. But there is one bike that stands above them all, the bike that changed everything, the bike that killed the 750 class and invented the modern world. The best, number 1, the Honda CBR900 RR Fireblade. The year was 1992. The sport bike world was dominated by dinosaurs. Tadao Baba, a visionary engineer at Honda, looked at the heavy leader bikes like the Yamaha FZR1000 and the Suzuki GSXR1100 and said, "This is wrong." These machines were fast trains, but they handled like boats. He didn't want more power, he wanted less weight. He coined the phrase total control. The result was a revelation. It featured an 893 cubic centimeter engine. It produced 122 horsepower. But here is the number that matters: 405 pounds dry. That was 75 pounds lighter than the competition. In fact, it was only 2 pounds heavier than Honda's own CBR600F2. It was the weight of a 600 with the power of a 1000. It rewrote the rulebook. Before the Fireblade, fast meant heavy. The Fireblade was a scalpel. It flicked into corners with a mere thought. It accelerated so violently because it had no mass to hold it back. It famously used a controversial 16-inch front wheel to make the steering even sharper and twitchier than anything else on the road. It wasn't just a bike, it was a revolution that literally killed the 750 cubic centimeter superbike class overnight. It forced Yamaha to build the R1. It forced Suzuki to build the GSXR1000. It forced Kawasaki to build the ZX-9R. Every modern sport bike you see today traces its DNA directly back to the 1992 Fireblade. It is iconic. From the Swiss cheese holes drilled in the fairing to save grams, to the dual round headlights, to the legendary Urban Tiger paint schemes that followed. It is reliable Honda engineering packaged in a chassis that felt like pure magic. Riding one today, you are shocked by how modern it feels compared to its peers. It isn't just the best Japanese bike of the 90s, it is one of the most important motorcycles in history. If you think the 90s were crazy, wait until you see other videos we have for you. Click this video right here. If you enjoyed this blast from the past, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe for more motorcycle history.